it's been a very long time since I come back to KL, since COVID started. So it's very nice to be here. I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to come and talk to you all about a topic that like not a lot of people like, but I like. I'm here to talk to you about CSS. So my name is Jing, and I'm currently based in Singapore, and I'm working as a front-end developer. And I also know that CSS is not everybody's cup of tea. Like some of you might fall asleep during this, so it's okay. Tired, I forgive you today, Saturday. But I'm not here to tell you to love CSS as much as I do. But regardless of your feelings about CSS, if you happen to work on front end, odds are you will still need to cross paths with CSS somehow lah. And again, you don't have to love it. Like I also don't like a lot of things, but I will still do because need to pay my bills, right? So CSS one of those things, okay? But the good thing about CSS that is now, right, 2022, is easier than before to build layouts that are suitable for the web. And when I talk about the web, right, web quite special. Let me close this because I also don't want notifications. The web is special because if you think about it, it's the one medium, right, where the things that you build guaranteed will not be viewed in exactly the same way you build one. Because, you know, some people, like technology move very fast. Then some people say, oh, I use voice. No. Today, even the people watching online, you're looking at me through a screen, right? Cannot run away from screen. Designing layouts is slightly different from what you are used to if you do something fixed. So technology now, your screens can be as small as a watch face, can be as big as a 70-inch HD TV. And you, if you are a designer, a developer, creator, you cannot control. You can't say, oh, everybody must view on like this size. Cannot. People view on a watch, they view on a watch. What are you going to do? Right. So what this means is that the way we think about designing layouts on the web must be different. Your mental model needs to be a bit different. And the tools that we use also must be more suited to this like fluid medium. And luckily for us now, what the browsers support, Flexbox and Grid, across all major browsers do it very well already. You cannot use the excuse that, oh, not supported. Someone IE recently retired already. So you all need a new excuse. If you don't want to use new excuse, guys. But with Flexbox and Grid, right, your toolbox is like level up already. Okay, I'm here to explain how much it has leveled up. So the interesting thing about Grid and Flexbox is they were both introduced after the web evolved to something more than a document viewer. Like very early on, web just used to view text only, document viewer. But then a few years later, people were like, hey, I can view ads with this, view ads can earn money, right? So then everybody start building apps. But the problem is when you build apps, right, it's a bit more complicated. You got more things on the screen. And then how, if you got many things on the screen, how you going to lay them out, right? So last time, very, very leceh. Last time, if you have used floats before, you know that you have to make the adjustments onto the items themselves. So if you have block boxes or you have inline boxes, right, they're very shocked and diri. They don't know about the people on their left, their right. And if you want to arrange all the boxes on your page in a certain way, right, one by one, you must go and adjust, right? So for example, here, I want my 3 items to line up nicely, 3 columns. What to do? Each of your box, you must go to the box and say, hi box, can you please be 33%? And then you repeat for all 3 of your box, then you got 3 boxes. Even if you do inline block the same, you must go and you must set the width individually. So you can think about it like yeah, everybody shocks and diri. But when it comes to Flexbox and Grid, this is the different mental model. Flexbox and Grid, they use something called a parent-child relationship. So what you do is, when you apply the display property on the parent, right, the immediate children all will be affected. And you can kind of control all the children together in this manner. So the children items themselves will also kind of have an awareness of the sibling items in the same formatting context. One thing to remember is that this relationship doesn't extend into the nested items. So like something to remember if you debugging, because a lot of times some of us, we cannot fully control the markup. Someone else write, CMS write, like, you know, and or if you are working with components that are very nested, sometimes like it's spread over. If you higher level component, then maybe your styles are separate. Then we're like, how come display, my display is so funny? Then you inspect like, oh, nested. So it's something to keep in mind when you are doing debugging. So, okay. Basic. So if you set the display property to flex, you don't need to do anything else. Everything kind of like fall into place. This is because when you set the display of a box to flex, it creates this formatting context, a flex formatting context for all the immediate children. And elements in the flex formatting context, they have a different set of behaviors from a block box or inline box. They unique in their own way. So what are these behaviors? There's no margin collapse. When you do block boxes, the margins collapse between the child and the parent one. But in a flex formatting context, there's no margin collapse. Float and clear have no effect, so don't bother. Vertical align also no effect, don't bother. It's because the flex formatting context operates differently. To remember, that operates differently. So when you try to vertical align your Flexbox and it doesn't work, it's the same as if I'm standing in this room and I'm like, hey, ladies, please stand up. The gentleman won't move, what? Because doesn't apply to me. So it's the same concept. Just think of it that way. The only thing that does work is the absolute positioning still works. So you can still absolutely position a flex child somewhere. So again, think about it, like flex items, they are flex boxes. They are different from all other boxes that you knew before. And my favorite thing to say is that everything on the web is a box. And box, I know you say like, oh, but what about the round things on the web? It's just a box with the corner cut off, right? But everything on the web is still a box. So the term flex box is short form for flexible box. So it means that the size of your flex box can grow and shrink to adapt to the amount of free space available in the parent container. So free space is this very interesting concept that new layout models, Flexbox and Grid, they focus on controlling free space. I'll explain more later. And so this concept of flexible growth, right, is actually completely different from what most web developers are used to when it was first introduced. So actually quite confusing. When it started, I also very confused. Everybody confused together. This is because, right, the size of your Flexbox, like if you saw the first two examples, right, when I tell the box 33%, it quite come up 33%. Like very straightforward relationship. Like I ask you 500 pixels, you come up 500 pixels. Easy to understand, one-to-one relationship. But for Flexbox, the values that you set on the box themselves may or may not be the end size. Because after you set the value, right, there's extra calculation that go on top. So the good thing about today is that Devtools, this is a Google event, but unfortunately, for now, this calculation only Firefox got. But okay. So I mean, it's okay. Like all the browsers are friends. So for it, the Firefox Devtools actually shows you what are the additional calculations. At first, I confused. Then I see these numbers, then I'm less confused. So I'm hoping if I share with you all also be less confused with me. So I will show more detailed examples soon. But basics first. So the flex property itself only applies onto the flex item. And it specifies how the box needs to grow or shrink. So flex is actually shorthand for three separate longhand properties, which is grow, shrink, and flex basis. So the specification, if you read the specification, and I always say this, but I know nobody read the specification, so I read for you all. I read already, then I tell you. Specifications say that ideally try to use flex, the shorthand, instead of the individual flex grow, flex string, flex basis, because when you use this particular shorthand, it will reset the other components to they call it reasonable defaults. Yeah, so I guess you know if the spec asks you to do it, there's a good reason. So ideally do it lah, huh? Okay, demo time. Let's hope StreamYard still works. Open new tab. If the demo fail, you know there's what like there's just live lah, huh? Everybody just accept. Is it small? Is it too small? Can see. Wait. Okay. I must learn from Jaslyn and zoom big. Dun 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 dun. Bigger?
One more.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. So the most basic. I gotta say. If you need to see the calculation, use Firefox. But if you just want to see the overlay, everybody also got Chrome. Chrome got Flex overlay. Everybody. So when you turn on if you go to inspector and then you click on the what should we call this? Tag. You click on the tag, you can see the overlay. So the overlay will show you how much space each of your flex items take up, and then it also show you the free space. So that's the most basic one. But now what I want to do is I want to explain the different flex properties. So first one is flex grow, and actually flex grow is reasonably straightforward to understand once you know, but we must use numbers. Yes. So in this example, right, like I said, if you don't do anything to your flex items, the default value come up is 0, 1, and auto. So for this example, all I did is I set the parent to 800, and then each of the child items, there are 3, right? A is 170, B is 140, and C is 160. So how much free space do you have? I won't ask you to do math. 330, I count for you already. 330 pixels. So flex grow itself determines how much of the free space should be distributed to all the flex items. So if you think about it, it's only relevant if your container is bigger than the width of all your individual flex items. Because if not bigger, then there's no free space, then like don't need to play already, right? So that's the thing. Remember, this grow only is relevant in this scenario. So now that we have 330 pixels, I think you can think like I spend time thinking about these numbers, so the number is round, okay? Otherwise you get a lot of decimal points. But because of these round numbers, it's easier to understand. So now I have 330 pixels. I need to distribute them among these 3. So how? The distribution is done based on your flex grow value. So the flex grow itself, it's a number value that determines the grow factor. It's like ratio like that. So to keep things straightforward, I choose to let everybody grow the same rate. So everybody's flex grow is set to 1. So when everyone's flex grow is set to 1, you have 330 pixels of free space, and you have 3 items that need to grow. So everybody grow by how much? Well done, everybody can do maths. Yes. So if you go to the layout panel, you can see that the browser, that's exactly what the browser do. It says, okay, the width that I set was 170, but my end result is not 170. It's because the flex grow is 1. So it has to grow by 110. So its end size is actually 280. And the others is the same. Then become 250 and 270. Let the browser do maths lah. Why own self do? So that's how it works. So you can play around with, depending on the end result that you want. Maybe your application, you want certain things to grow, or you want certain things to grow at a different rate. You can play around with the ratios. So I want to keep things simple. So for the next example, I'm like, okay, only A and B grow, C don't grow. So now you have 330 pixels of free space, divide between 2 items. So each person get how many free space? Well done, everybody. Maths good. Okay, so correct, 165. And you can also see it here. And that's pretty much how it works. I think conceptually, flex grow is reasonably straightforward to understand. The algorithm is not that bad. So after flex grow, the next one is flex shrink. So flex shrink very similar to flex grow. It's just in the opposite direction. So if it determines how much your flex item needs to shrink, when there's not enough space. So this one is only relevant when the parent container is smaller than the total weight of your content. Because otherwise you don't use shrink, right? It's very logical. Everybody is very logical one. It's not confusing, So the calculations of how a flex item to shrink is not as straightforward. So again, the text is very small, so I will say it out loud. The algorithm got about 4 steps. Let's look at the example first. Again, I thought very hard about the numbers so that come out the number nice. So now I have a parent container that's 600, but my children, I set the width to 150, 140, and 300. 150 plus 450 plus 300 is, well done, is 900. But my container is only 600, so everybody need to shrink. We need to shrink by 300. Everybody also need to shrink. So for this example, I didn't do anything to the flex children. So by default, the flex children themselves have flex grow of 0. Everyone has flex shrink of 1. Means everybody will shrink at the same amount. So how much you think that, oh wait, I got 300 of, I need to shrink 300, I got 3 items, everyone shrink 100. No, that's not how it works. So got formula and the formula. First thing you need to do is you, not you don't need to do anything. Browser do for you. So I'm going to tell you what the browser do. Browser will take the flex shrink value, then multiply by flex basis. So let's just talk about A lah. A, you take flex basis is 1, multiply by 150, flex shrink times flex basis. Then you take that value, you divide by everybody's flex basis. So 150 divided by 900. And then you take this number and then you times by the amount that needs to be shrunk. And you get 50 pixels. You don't need to know this. Honestly, you don't really need to know this because browser do it for you. It's just kind of good to know, like trivia, like, hey, I know how flex shrink calculate, and then nobody cares because it's not important. Browser do it for you already. But that's pretty much how it works. So it's not that everybody shrinks by 100. Item A shrink by 50, item B shrink by 150, item C shrink by 100. But that's how it works. It's a ratio thing to a certain extent. Then the last of the 3 is called flex basis. And to me, I feel this property very important. It's kind of a big key to understanding how sizing works in Flexbox because it determines what is the starting value of how the browser calculates things. So remember, it's a starting value. The final size is as to be determined after all the calculations. So it may or may not be the end size. So when we don't, the default again is auto. So usually auto will resolve to the content width. Content width basically is how much space it needs to lay everything out one line. So I have a very rubbish example. There's a short one, there's word, this is a sentence, this is a much longer sentence. So if we check the length of the longer sentence is about 455 pixels, right? So when you look at the calculations, the browser will start calculating from 455 when it's auto. But if you set an explicit width on your item, so highlight this. Because I set the width to 300, the browser is going to start calculating from 300. That's the width. If you have both width and flex basis present, flex basis will kind of like win. And so your item's starting size becomes 250. So that's how it works when you're using flex. Because I think maybe sometimes you're like, hey, I set the width to 500. Why come out not 500? Sometimes it might be your flex basis. So that's something that is good to understand. So just a reminder again, because just now we talked a lot about free space, right? When you, under normal circumstances, flex grow is based on the amount of free space left. And left after your content width is minus off. They aren't considered free space. So when you look at something like this example, right? So I've set the flex grow to 1. So by right, if got free space, everyone grow at the same rate. And the basis is auto. So the starting size is the content width. So that's why when you look at the width of all the different items, it's like they are not equal. They're not equal because their starting size was different when the calculation happened. If you really want all your items to be exactly the same width, is possible. In order to do that, right, you have to tell the browser to ignore content size. So when you set the flex basis to 0, the browser doesn't take into account content size anymore. So what this means is that the browser will assume everything in your parent container can divide. So in this particular instance, how long? Let's see if I can get a nice round number. It just. I don't want decimal point. Okay, 370. Nice. So for example, if my parent container is 1110, I can tell the browser, okay, this 1110 all can divide one. So when you set the flex basis to 0, the browser just ignores the content size. And, okay, I start from 0. So 1110 divided by 3 is, I also don't know. Browser say 370. So if you look at all three, they are all three the same size and all three are 370. This is based on all this behavior, I think there's enough variation that you can pretty much get everything the same, the size that you would like it to lay out very flexibly. So I think that's the point. That's the point of why it behaves like that. Is because I cannot guarantee, like right now here standing in front of me, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screens, and then all of them different sizes one. You cannot guarantee that your layout is gonna be exactly the same size. So this flexibility is actually very good because it can allow the individual components of your application or your website, right, to grow and shrink based on the different ratios and sizes of a screen. So I think this is actually a very good thing, even if it's a little bit complicated to understand, right? So let's go back. Basics covered. Another interesting feature of Flexbox, I think, is worth talking about is direction, because content flow is actually very closely related to writing system. Writing system is like the direction that your words will flow. So here, a lot of us can speak English, speak Malay, the writing mode is top to bottom, left to right, right? But I mean, writing system got a lot of different direction one. If you see like Jawi or Hebrew, then it goes from right to left. If you see the traditional Japanese, Chinese, is vertical, right to left. If you see traditional Mongolian, is vertical, but left to right. So a lot of directions your content can flow. But when you think about things on the web, right, usually it's just mostly left to right. And if before Flexbox, if you wanted to do something weird, like bottom to top, you probably cannot do it. You probably need to use JavaScript to like reorder the source or something. But with flex directions, so there's a property called flex direction. They're like, oh, you want what direction? Any direction also can. Every direction. Like, why are we limiting you do whatever you want, right? So this is quite interesting because default is row, so like very straightforward, left to right. When you swap it to column, so I think that's the most common use case I see today is either left to right, top to bottom. So you switch it to column, then it's this way. But there's actually a reverse. There's a reverse option to this. So if you put a dash reverse on your flex direction, right, it can start from the right. And the most fun thing, I personally think, I think column reverse is damn fun. But I wonder, is it because nobody knows that you can do this? Because sometimes it's like, if you don't know something exists, you won't bother. But now that you know that it exists, then maybe you can do something funny with it. I'm not the most creative person, but I'm sure there's some design use case for this. I just need someone more creative to think about it. But it's just good to know that this exists. That's a fun fact. But as nice as Flexbox is, there's a limitation, or okay, cannot say limitation. It's just that Flexbox is not meant to create actual grid that got x and y axis. No, because actually most of the layout models, right, is single dimension in the sense that everything is just supposed to come after one another. And then if you look at this diagram of these very cute boxes, you're like, hey, got grid what? There is 3 rows and 4 columns. No, fake one. because all the grids that we used to do is just because we make everybody the same size. So then they're like, oh, I just happen to line up like my bottom got like people neatly below me. But if you ask, item 1 doesn't actually know that item 5 is directly below it one, because why my diagram like that? Okay, let's see if I can do this. Yeah, I want to say that. Oh yeah, I tested on my machine and it looked fine. Sorry. That was a very okay. I'm just going to make this. Yeah, just delete it, huh? Cannot delete. Okay. Yeah, just pretend that this is not broken. The moment that your boxes are different sizes, the column just gone already, because there's no actual grid. The grid, right, is we kind of magically made the grid exist with the power of maths. That's why a lot of people use grid libraries, because the grid libraries do the maths for you, and then all you need to do is put the correct CSS class. But I'm like, hiya, why do you all like to do maths? Browser can do maths better than you. So the nice thing about CSS grid is that they actually really legit got grid. Cause yeah, okay, even though you see everyone is the same shape, they will line up nicely. Even if they're the different shapes, they will still line up nicely. Because what CSS grid does is that it really allocates things based on the X and Y axis. And later when I talk about the syntax, you'll see that it's actually, they really go with that concept lah. Like, so the code for the most basic grid is not that complicated. You only need 3 lines. You tell the parent, and actually most of the grid all of the grid setup is done on the parent container. The kits, you basically just need to place them. But the actual grid, your actual layout, is only set on the parent container. And we'll go into this in a demo. Hopefully the demo doesn't fail. But so all you need is to set a display grid ready. Then you need to define how many columns you want. You use grid template rows. You define how many rows you want. You can use grid template. So column row. So the syntax itself is also, if you look at it, it's quite visual, because if I want 3 columns, I got 3 values for column. If I want 2 rows, I got 2 values for rows. So personally, I kind of like this syntax lah. Okay, demo time. Hope it doesn't fail. So if we want to explain all the different properties that we have, we should have a scenario. So okay. I also got to say, even though I'm using Firefox now, if you use Chrome also have grid. Safari also got grid. Everybody also got grid. So grid is great. Must keep saying Google. Well done, Google. So the interface for the DevTools generally the same. There will be this tag that you can click on. Then the moment you click on, then you can see the overlay, and you can see the numbers. Because the numbering is basically how grid works. It's how you define where to put stuff. So this is very basic. So the scenarios today is I want a grid with 4 equal columns, and then between each column I want to get 20 pixel gap, arbitrary value. So okay, let's try. First thing, you can do it something like this. You can say, okay, everyone 200, then I get 20, right? I just define 220, 220. So it kind of works. You can see that there's a grid and there's a gap, but the gap is actually not a 4x2 already. It's actually like a 7. Or actually it should be a 7 by. It should be a 7 by 3 by right, because if you want the grid, you want a gap at the row also, then it will become a 7 by 3 grid, which is, it works. But then because the gap columns that you define are actually also columns, right? There might be a situation where you accidentally put content into the gap, which is like, that's a bit fail. So it's okay, because grid gives us this new property called gap. And gap is great because it's very clean. If you want to have gaps between your columns, I love it because the property name it what is it a gap? It's a gap. Call it gap. So the property name is gap. once you put 20, it automatically generates the gaps, and there's no danger that your content will fall into the gap one. So it's good. This is actually and if you look at syntax, it's better. It's actually really 4 values for 4 columns and two values for 2 rows. That's not bad. But if you say just now, it's like, oh wait, 200 pixels is a bit too fixed, right? Like, what's all this free space here? Like, no, I just now talk about all this nonsense about responsive, so you must make it responsive. So now I want 4 columns. 4 columns. My math teacher say if you 100% divide by 4, 25. So let's use 25% as the, if I want 4 responsive columns, right? So it should look okay. So I turn it on, and what is this? What is this? What is this annoying? I can't even. What's this annoying overlap? What's happening? Let me tell you what's happening. It's overflowing because, yes, correct. The gap value plus 100% exceed 100%. So it's like, oh yeah, push you out of overflow. So if you want to use percentages, you kind of have to take into account the amount of gap that you are putting and kind of do some maths around it. So yes, we can do maths. We can do something like this, where you say, okay, I have 4 columns, means I got 3 gaps. My 3 gaps times 20 becomes 60. So I must take 100% minus 60, whole thing divided by 4, and then do it 4 times. Then I'll get this. Like, hey, nice, no overflow. But like this line, this line very annoying. This line is very ridiculous. It's not dry, man. This is very long. It's not unacceptable. So the next feature of grid that I want to talk about is repeat. So what repeat allows you to do is it does let you dry up your code quite a bit. The end result is exactly the same, these two. It's just the code looks neater. Repeat takes 2 arguments. It's a function. So your first value is how many times you want the pattern to repeat. So here I kept it simple, but actually here you can actually declare as many values as you want, and the number will just repeat the whole pattern wholesale. So here I'm like, okay, that this funny calculation, I repeat 4 times, which is fine, which is good, but it's still ridiculous, right? Like if you want to change the size of your grid, you want to change number of columns, you have to do all these maths all over again. And like I said, don't do maths yourself. Browser can do it better than you, right? So the last thing I want to talk about as a great feature is FR. So what FR does is that it's a flexible length unit, and officially the official definition is that it represents the fraction of leftover space in the grid container. But what this does is that it can kind of neatly can detect, it will account for the gap for you, because when you use FR, the browser understands that the gap should not count into your actual grid column size. So your code can end up being wait, let me turn this off first. Don't want area name yet. So now your code looks super neat. You just say repeat 1 FR 4 times, and you end up with a very neat column, doesn't overflow, has all the gaps. And so these are the features that were introduced by grid, these additional properties that only apply to grid. So far, right, all these grids empty. So like, okay, we need to start placing items inside. So placing of items, again, is that's pretty much all you do when you're using grid. You do your entire setup. You're like, oh, sometimes you might want something very junky. I'm like, oh, first one flexible, this one 200 don't. Like you plan the whole thing on the parent. And then after that, for the items, right, it's just, oh, you go here, you go there, you go everywhere. So for when you don't do anything, by default, is a very intuitive behavior. Everything ABCD, one after another. And without doing anything, everyone just goes in, everyone's size is 1 cell. So that's if you don't declare anything on the items. But if you want very specific sizes or places that you want your items to go, the syntax for it will look like, what like that? The syntax for it will look like this. So it's, you define where the column start, where the column end, where the row starts, where the row end. So you use grid column. For item A here, I say you start from grid column 2, end grid column 4, start grid row 1, end grid row 3. So it's a 4, it takes up 4 cells. For everyone else, because I only decided to place A, B, C, and D, they will just again fill up whatever remaining space. That's like how the algorithm works. Place items that are placed, the browser will lay out first. Everyone else just fill up space. So that's pretty much how it works. If you, okay, later I show a more chunky example, just in case not enough time. But now that you have this concept of placing items in specific spots on a grid, overlapping become very easy already. I'm not sure about you, but like throughout the course of my career, the designers that I work with, they're like, oh yeah, we should have something overlapping because it looks more sophisticated. Well, then I'm like, oh, overlap, wow, damn hard, overlap. Sometimes you have to do, like, oh, okay, I think I have a negative margin. Then if negative margin, like, oh, okay. Or like, but it's like, oh, can we move it a bit? Then they want it to be more specific. Okay, I position absolute. Position absolute is the worst. You know why? Because when you position absolute, right, it's taken out of flow and then everything goes under. Then designer is like, no, it's covering. Then you don't design overlap lah. But cannot, because I need to pay my bills. So I need to write a lot of extra code just to get it done, because like, you know, we all need to pay rent. But now that you have grid, the overlapping becomes a lot more straightforward, because you can just assign where you want things to go. And I feel the behavior is quite intuitive from before, in that source order is followed. So if here, right, I on purpose I put A right in the middle and then I put B on top. You know based on the way that browser renders things is that the source order comes on top of each other. So that's why A is actually under B, and B is, you cannot see the word A is underneath. C will go on top of B, on top of D. And you can change this. If you want the order to change, you can kind of tweak the Z index. But overall, I think it's quite intuitive, and you can kind of do overlapping designs more easily than before. I won't say it's the easiest thing, but it's like easier lah. Like makes life easier for everybody. And you'll keep your designers happy also. The one more interest, and okay, grid actually has a lot of properties, but I'm just highlighting the ones that I feel that are most practical to me when we're actually doing stuff. The one very useful one I feel is you can name grid areas. So that was the thing that I was displaying just now. After you define your grid, you say, oh, I want 4 columns and I want 2 rows already, right? You can assign specific areas and you can name them. So after you do your columns and rows, you can think of it as like a label like that. So the syntax is your rows are represented by quotes. So you can see, right, this is a representation of the first row, and they are in quotes. This one is a representation. The next line in quotes is the next row, and you can name what the area should be. Here I just be very straightforward. I just use A, B, and C. You can actually use emojis. I've seen people use emojis. You can use actual words. You can say like house, boat, Google, and then after that, how it works is that you just tell your item you go in the area. So again, it's like kind of planning your thing on the parent level. So on purpose, I only give A, B, and C, because if D has no space to go, again, it's quite smart. You're like, oh, this space, you'll find the first available space you can fit in, and then you're just going to sit there. Like, so smart. I love it. But this name grid area is I find it very useful when you're doing responsive design, because at the end of the day, right, there'll be you can't really, unless your design really from 20 pixels to 20,000 pixels, all one column. They're like, yeah, I don't need to write breakpoints. Who needs breakpoints? Everyone else needs breakpoints, okay? So instead, can you imagine, like here is straightforward, like four items. If I really want to place all the 4 items differently at every breakpoint, it's not too bad. But let's say your layout is a bit more chunky, you got like more, like maybe 20 elements, right? If you one by one go and rearrange, a bit leceh. But when you do it with grid, for example, if I got 5 breakpoints, right? What I can do is I can change the grid at each of the 5 breakpoints without changing my grid area. Basically, I change the area where I want my element to be at each breakpoint. So all my code will be centered around my container. If I got 20 elements, do whatever, the 20 elements will always be in their allocated spot. So that's why I think there's a very good practical aspect to this. So that's great. What's next? Can't even memorize my own presentation. That's how terrible it is. The last thing I want to talk about is alignment. Because alignment, okay, it's not that magical, but alignment really ties this whole layout thing together. Because after you macro layout everything, you want to do micro adjustments, you can use the box alignment properties, which is a lot more intuitive than before, because alignment was first introduced for Flexbox. So I know that because it's been so popular, right? There's been discussion in like, oh, maybe we should backfill the functionality into the old style, the block boxes and inline should do this also. But maybe in the far future, because it's not a sexy new property like, oh, cascade layers or like that, and then everyone like, oh, we should ship it now. It's very vanilla, so maybe it won't ship soon, but it's being considered. For now, alignment properties only work for Flex and Grid, but it's really very useful. There are 6, and I think this one, I don't think you can get around not. Okay, I can. You can Google everything nowadays, so you don't really have to memorize, but it's good to kind of understand how it works. Out of these 6 properties, Grid, if you're using Grid, all 6 can use. If you're using Flexbox, right, only 4. Which ones, I'll explain which ones don't apply. If you look at the set, the first 2 is the content set. The content set of alignment properties is to shift everybody within the parent container. If the parent container got extra space, you can shift. That's for content. Items are applied to each of the individual children inside their area. So justify items and align items allows you to shift the individual flex or grid items inside their allocated space. But justify items doesn't work for flex. Why? Because if you can go back to this, right? If you look at this diagram, the left one is grid. So the grid, there is a possibility that you can move left, you can move in both directions within your allocated space. But when it comes to flex, right? Everything is lined up one after another. There's no free space to talk about when it's along the main axis. By default, you're just next to your friend already. There's no space. You cannot justify anything. Up and down, yes, can, because there's possibility that you got more or less space. But side by side, there's no space. So there's nothing to justify for flex. So that's how it works. Justify self and justify items. The items and self are actually the same thing. It's just that justify items got S, right? Plural, right? It means everybody do the same thing. So you got 6 items, or all 6 of you go up, all 6 of you go down. If out of your 6, you got like one person want to shock sendiri, you can adjust using self. So actually, I feel that this syntax is fairly intuitive if you really go and think about it. So these are the box alignment properties that you can use. And then, oh my God, I'm the one standing between you and lunch, right? Okay. I try to finish this. Can we put it all together? The answer, of course, is yes. It's kind of a rhetorical question. So stupid. But yes, you can kind of use it for. So I do this like imaginary. This is so small. This imaginary like hotel website thing where I on purpose go and make the layout a bit janky. It's good. Sometimes people ask you, flex and grid, which one better? There's no better. They do different things, so you use them together. That's how CSS works. So if your scenario is like for flex, I do it I use it most commonly for centering things. It's very cliche, but oh, how do you center a box? Alignment properties make it very easy. So usually I will build my navigation. I will try to use flex because very often my navigation items are not the same height one. So last time to get everything aligned center, wow, then difficult. It's like so much of my youth was spent centering items that were different heights. I'm like, wow, I could done so much more things with my life, but no, now I can save time. So for this, does it show up? Where is it? Flex. So if I don't have align items, when you apply flex onto something, by default, it will just stretch. So if I want to align it center, I can use center. And then the other items are like end, start, you can do all that. But the most common use case is obviously center because apparently that's the hardest thing in the world. Now it's very easy. So you need a different challenge in your life. For the rest of it, I went with grid because this layout is kind of complicated. And so I wanted to highlight the fact that the name areas scenario is very helpful here because hopefully you can see the widest. I don't know if you all work with designers, but sometimes I get designers, they do design systems that have a grid, and their grids are like at the narrow width, they will have the columns will change. And I think it makes sense. It makes sense because if it's so narrow, it doesn't make sense to have 12 columns if like your screen size is very narrow. And with grid, is reasonably straightforward to define it. So if you see an action, right, at the widest, I have 12 columns. But at a slightly narrower width, it will pop to 8 columns. And a narrower width, again, it can pop to 4 columns. And you can do that fairly straightforward with a combination of breakpoints and grid. So you just have to define your grid at the different breakpoints, but your item code don't need to change. So here I got quite a few items. I just allocate them to the same areas. So regardless of whether it's a 4 column, I should have named it nicer, but like link is L1, L2, L3. What is this? SH. SH is subhead. Okay. I don't know how to name things. But the fact is that I've made all of them stay in the same area. And every time I change a breakpoint, I change the grid. So they are still in their allocated areas. It's just that when I change the breakpoint, I just move the things around on the same grid. So again, all my code is centered around the container. I didn't need to go into the individual item level to go and modify. So for me, from a developer perspective, it makes it easier to organize my code. Like I don't have to scroll 20 elements just to change. So I think this is a very particularly strong feature of grid. And honestly, if you ask me to build this type of a layout without grid, I would just take the design and politely tell the designer, you own self build. Because really, actually, can you think about it? Like to do all these offsets without something like grid, it's not say cannot, but you really have to write a lot of code to do it. I feel that with grid, layouts like this become more possible. And honestly, I think the designers also happier because instead of hearing no all the time, you're like, I actually can lah. Because you cannot make it sound very easy, right? You're like, yeah, can lah. So there's like, keep your designers honest. So hopefully, after this, you won't find CSS as annoying as before. Again, you don't have to love it, but if it needs to pay your bills, it makes sense to do it easier, right? Yeah. So okay, thank you everyone for listening. Can go eat lunch now. Yay.
Just now for the alignment, actually Chrome Devtools have one thing that Firefox.
Okay, I show. This one I know. Yeah. This one I understand. Yes. Okay, what does Chrome have, but Firefox don't have? Okay, we must show you a Chrome only functionality, everybody. Yeah. First, let's zoom. Then you click on Flex. See, Chrome also got. So then you can see the overlay, very good. And then if you go down in the elements panel, can I move it up? Okay. Scroll, pseudocode. you see this cute little icon that if you play mahjong, it looks like 六索. You click on it, click on the 六索, everybody, click on it, and then you can see this is something that I think only Chromium did, is that you can do instead of typing, you can kind of, they use visual representation. I think the icons make sense. To me, it makes sense that because it looks very similar to the like Figma, those design tools when they do the alignment. So you can actually adjust and see how it looks like directly from the DevTools, and it also does directions. It also does wrapping. So this is quite a nice feature. That Chrome has, nobody else has. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my DevTools friend. Okay, any other question? Don't have right? Okay, everybody go eat lunch.